Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, even. It's my pleasure to be the chair of this last session of the symposium that has been organized by Deakin University and especially by Anna Halahoff in collaboration with Paul Bramadat and Galen Woods, but also Rosie Shores. So many of collaborators being here. My first word is to acknowledge that as for Australian participants, and this is a workshop organized by Deakin University, it is very important to acknowledge the land of the First Nation people, and that the Deakin University is there. So I'm abroad and I'm not in the context, but I would like to let know that we take this into account and we pay our respect. Going to the session, I think that's going to be a very interesting session because all your talks might speak to each other. The first presenter is Irene Becci, who is a professor in Lausanne University. She's also the dean of the faculty at this right moment. So we really appreciate that she can make and be here. And she's also the future or already president of the International Society for the Sociology of Religion. So Irene, I'm going to give the floor to you. And then if it's right for everyone, we are going to give you a maximum of 20 minutes per each. And then we're going to open the discussion for the whole panel, since I think that it will work better. So thank you very much. And Irene, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mara. I just had to jump out. I don't know why in the minutes you said where you are, and I guess you're not in Australia. I'm sorry. I'm not in Australia neither. When the first invitation came for this conference, I thought I would be, but as Mar said, really being a dean, and I'm really sorry, my presentation will be almost where I wanted it to be. It's not really ready in my view because I really had to jump from one meeting to the other, which is also why I missed the rest of your meeting. And I'm really, really sorry about that. So please accept my apologies to start with. And now let me see if I can use this 20 minutes in a meaningful way. Okay. When you asked me and when you encouraged me to work actually on this idea of the link between spirituality, well-being, and risk, I found it very interesting to really associate the whole well-being spirituality issue with risk. And so my first idea, and I think this was also the idea of the organizers, was to think about the work I'm doing on these ecology movements and the ecological commitments of persons dealing actually with risk situations in different terms. And one of my first ideas, this is why I gave this title to my talk, Nature Experience as a Shelter in a way, as a transcendent shelter from urban risks, was to actually came really from my empirical field work. So I will not have the time in this 20 minutes to come back to all the methods, how I came, but it will be very short. I will base my ideas, my reflections. I will rather use these 20 minutes to elaborate some ideas and reflections but this is based on empirical materials and theoretical reflections that I've been carrying on since 2015, in particular around Switzerland, but also partly in France and close nearby areas of this Swiss region. Because many persons actually I talked to and I explored do talk of nature in a way as a way they experience to get away from the risks. Environmental crisis is how they are affected by environmental crisis and all the risks how they have to deal with this disaster, collapse, etc. So, but then after of preparing, of course, the talk, and I don't want just to repeat what I have written elsewhere. We will have the occasion at the end to see and read whatever you would like to go deeper into some details. But actually, this is only one part of it. And I would today give another title to this talk, which would be rather, how come that nature has developed from a risky place to a shelter from risk? And in which situations? How come that we actually come from societies where nature has long time and still is in some discourses considered as one of the major risks actually of humanity, to a situation where it's the opposite, where actually nature gives us shelter against risks. And I think this is because of this sort of processes of sacralization in new spiritual ways that we have developed in our relationship to environment, why this comes so. Right, so my plan will be, so to have this in the background is maybe useful, and I hope I should go on the second, right, sorry. Okay, my plan is then hence to give you a little bit of the context. What is precisely the risk? Maybe you are in Australia or somewhere else, but not in Switzerland. What is exactly the risk that we are talking about here in terms of environmental crisis or dangers in the region where I am and where this research has been driven out? What are the main results of our research? Because actually we did what we found, and we will see it, is not that there's just one eco-spirituality. A lot of literature has been talking about eco-spirituality or sometimes eco-psychology, but actually there are very many different vernacular ways of talk and live eco-spiritualities. And I will shortly present them because only in some of them actually nature has this role of a shelter against risks, not in all of them. So this is why I will go through the 5 types I will have and then see how we can conclude. And I count on Mar in giving me the timeline as quick as I can. One of the first risks, and this is true because we are working on the current ecological movements and have this look at activists of nowadays ecological sensibilities, and most of these activists are actually really coming from urban contexts, and this narrative about the nature as a shelter is very strongly said by urban dwellers, in particular about urban nature. So this is why my focus in a way is on these risks, because of course there are many other risks in terms of environmental crisis, but in the cities what is very clearly is this context of heating cities where they're getting higher, where the temperatures are getting higher and higher, and where people are really afraid of dying, actually, of not having enough fresh air or fresh places where to stay, and how this is really the good example of the trap we are getting into, because the more you refresh your areas, your house, the more you actually create the conditions for heating up even more urban conditions. So one of the issues is, and this is very strongly also taken over by communication, by institutional political authorities. This is, for instance, just a projection you can see from the Federal Office of Switzerland, showing how Zurich is going to get heat, how many days per year are getting hotter and hotter every day, and they call it the tropical nights that we will have in future to deal with. Maybe in Australia you find it strange, but for Swiss people it's really scary to think that the temperatures will rise so highly in what is considered really a mountain area with fresh air, and where we have been all this vegetation just living because it's fresh actually. And so around, this is just one example, this heating up of the temperatures, where people can see that there is climate change and that this climate change is having a risk. This brings together all this idea of collapse, which is really very popular and has been widespread. And there have been quite a lot of studies showing that, in particular, young people involved into this ecological movements are affected by this kind of eco-anxiety, solastalgia, etc. So not having really, really suffering from this situation, that realizing that so many biodiversity and other issues are actually just extinction, close to extinction. So, and in these terms, there is a very clear political will also locally to kind of tackle these issues. And it's interesting how nature is used in a way into these political ways. And one example really very close from where our university is the city of Lausanne, was recently really inspired by other cities like Lyon and other Geneva also, and other cities close, wants to increase the number of trees in the city. Trees are getting really the major symbol for fighting in a way, for nature in a way, and for fighting against climate change. And there's a plan talking about the canopy and saying that really there's the heat islands and the flooding risks are high in Swiss cities, in Switzerland in general, and the canopy of increasing the canopy of trees can really help this. And so there's a strong work made around this idea of how do trees help people in the cities, but also in general, because there's anyway, the population is very urbanized all over Switzerland, or also around out of the cities. And the other context we have to just show, I will not comment the details of this table, but this is just to give you some examples, because one of the issues is that we have studied in these environmentalist milieus in Switzerland, that actually these people are typically those people you would not consider religious. Actually, these people are not belonging to any religion, those who are most active also in the city. They are not in these terms religious, but they consider themselves very spiritual. So we have these people encouraged by a secular context that shows that there are risks with the situation. They are directly concerned by these risks, and the solution in a way comes in nature. And this really talks a lot and resonates a lot in the minds of these ecologically committed people who have a strong sensibility to what is called spirituality for them. Moreover, we have also seen, this is just to say that many of these spiritually committed ecological people are in the majority women, actually, the majority rather people living in urban areas, strongly connected, nevertheless, strongly informed, and rather left-wing oriented. So this is just to give you somehow the profile of these people who we will see then that we have studied, and do have this idea of nature as being a shelter from risks also, although they go themselves into many, many risks. So what we have also seen is this, of course, this eco-spirituality that has been for a long time just existing, of course, in history and existing by some groups from Romanticism to today, has now become really more popular and has been really largely widespread. And thereby creating some sort of impression that everybody is somehow talking about spirituality. And this first impression may give the idea that they do all have the sort of same eco-spirituality. Actually, we really realized that these are not the same. And we have at least here empirically found 5 types of eco-spiritualities that I would call vernacular forms of eco-spiritualities. One is rather this ecumenical, classical, green Christian theology that does exist. There are some parishes, that there are some institutions trying to connect to this, to some ideas. I will then show you which one. Another one we have called it the transition network. The transition network is a rather large network, but this idea is that we have to make a transition resilient. It is not only in terms of infrastructures and of society and politically, but also internal. That internally of ourselves, our souls, our spirits have to make a transition to better understand the crisis that is going on and how far we are actually responsible as human beings of this crisis and the risks we are facing. The boundaries are not totally clear-cut, but within these transition networks, there are some Christians and there are other types, but there are some really, most of all, really based on this idea of transition. And the other 3 are maybe smaller to some extent. We have called one of them the neo-traditions. This is all the activists or ecological spiritual persons who relate to traditional religions, probably pre-Christians, Druidism or shamanism, for instance. And then there are the holistic spiritualities, that maybe also integrate more this sort of partly new age ideas, but also oriented towards ecofeminism in part of it. And then we have also found that there are quite a lot of people who actually find themselves very well without any sort of spiritual connotation, but still in an idea of nature as an enchanting place. So what I would call the secular enchantments. But let me just to say that most of these, I mean, what happened that, why did we just have some people having eco-spiritual views, like some philosophers or from Rousseau to Arnenès, to so many different types today? Well, one of the factors is that it has been very strongly widespread by popular media. One example is just books. Many books and films have been talking about ecology and risks of ecological linked to our spiritual commitment. Vandana Shiva is just one of them, but many books on trees also. These are just two that have been bestsellers in Switzerland, both on the idea that how many things we don't know or can't see about trees, but actually are going on, their communication, their emotional life in a way also. So let me say a few words. Well, it's interesting that these green Christian theologies, based on Laudato Si, but not only, I mean, because there are some, I will come back to this slide, also in the Protestant world, there is in both, and in particular also in the Orthodox world, parishes that try to make the ecological transition in terms of infrastructures, as you can see in the picture, putting solar panels on their buildings, etc., talking about Bible creation verses, etc. But here, nature is really not understood the way it will be understood by the others. Nature here is actually either a place where you go to contemplate the creation in a way. It's the reflection also in a way of God's intervention. Nature is not itself God. God can be nature, but nature is not something sacred in itself. And so this is not by these people. Some of them say, well, I go into the nature to meditate or that we find, but in these kind of narratives, their nature is really just in a way the decoration or the background of their experience. Their experience is most of all an experience of theological or inner life, spiritual life in nature. It's not necessarily this idea of nature being the shelter of something. Where we found it more is in this transition network that has this idea that the earth is the way I am. So there's a strong mirror effect between the world, the planet, nature, and myself. And many of these transition networkers, in a way, are also active in Extinction Rebellion. Extinction Rebellion is, just to make an example, quite clear in these terms. And it's interesting because Extinction Rebellion and the activists in those movements do talk about all these risks of ecological and social collapse. And they do have internally, and probably don't know to what extent you know, but many Buddhists and Quakers are among the founders of Extinction Rebellion. So there's this whole idea of a strong link with spirituality and this commitment, but the mode of action, political mode of action of these militants is also very risky in itself and puts some other people also into risk. So it's interesting how this, there's a whole idea there about dealing with a bigger risk. There's a kind of a scaling of risks between the bigger risk that we actually are in extinction, heading an extinction, and the smaller risks of stopping traffic or making some risky actions where I go into jail, etc., etc. And here, nature is it is still kind of this mirror of the human's action on nature. So it's experienced as a place that is also a place where you can see the suffering. You can see how the planet and Earth is suffering from our intervention. So many people use these ideas in terms of to heal ourselves and to heal nature. So nature can be only a shelter if you find that nature that is not yet dead or that is not yet dying in a way, because that sort of nature is pulling you down, actually, is not really a resource and a shelter. And then there are these neo-traditional eco-spirituality. I found most of all neo-shamanic and neo-druidistic or neo-druid activists around this area that really have this sort of animist view on nature, that do communicate with what they call spirits of nature, that can be in the trees, but also imagined if you go in an experience walking through a forest. The forest, this is an image, for instance, of a photographer and a neo-shamanic practitioner. And for them, nature is really a shelter. Nature is where they go, and actually they talk sometimes of creating a space within the forest or somewhere in nature, on a mountain or wherever, between cliffs or around a rock, where they create a cathedral or they create chapels. So they use this kind of vocabulary to reconsider the space. And the resource of nature is totally infinite, and it really can be in all situations helpful to go into nature. It's interesting because we went for a walk. I went with a group of students and with a new shamanic practitioner recently to have an experience of what they call a sort of forest bath. And it's interesting because in the morning we wanted to go into a forest that is now a national park in Switzerland. And I invited also the head of the project of this national park to join. In the morning, a lot of winds came, it was raining, and she said she would not come. And she wrote an email to me saying, considering the strong winds announced that are over 20 kilometers per hour, I do not recommend to adventure into the forest for security reasons. And her perception is typically the secular perception of risk. If it's too windy, you don't go into a forest. For the new shamanic practitioners, it was not a question at all. You go into forest in any kind of situation, because the forest in a way is there to shelter, as it's protecting. It's just how you deal with that space. You have to respect it more differently, or maybe stop at some point, but it's not this idea that you listen to some kind of authority saying that there are too many winds. So it's very interesting that the perception of risks is totally different around the same activity, the same place, by secular people or by this new traditional eco-spiritual people. So I could go further on, but it's very interesting because we have made lots of interviews with this druid and new shamanic practitioners. They talk really of nature also in a queer way. It's a classical place where you can do things where categories mix up. What Donna Haraway also calls in a way, or Anna Tsing, I think, the mesh. So it's not totally a Disneyfied idea of the forest. The forest is what it is. It is also can be injured, it can be dangerous, it can be, but most of all, you deal with it because you're part of it. So in a way, you go into it. Where we find a more, you can also see it in some of the posters we found in during demonstrations, etc., that these people have this idea of identifying to nature. No, we are not defending nature, we are nature defending itself. We are nature that defends itself. So we are the nature itself. Where you have more, maybe a little bit more what some call Disneyfied idea of nature in a way is in the next two types of eco-spirituality. I will quickly summarize. I called it exo-holistic eco-spirituality. I thought maybe this helps to understand, because holism is such a huge term, everything is holistic in a way. But I thought there are some ideas that you can put into a holistic ideas, because this is why they how the people see the world, their cosmology, everything is connected, and etc. But in a way, they look for models of these holistic models in cultures that are outside of one's own culture, outside in a sort of future world, it is this new age, or outside in terms of culture, like new Buddhist world. Joanna Macy, in a way, is quite interesting. And the translation of Joanna Macy's work that we connect into French is also interesting, because it shows, well, there's an introduction by the Dalai Lama of her book, and it's also prefaced by Pablo Cervinho, who is the author of this Collapse book, and very popular here over. So here, what is the idea of nature in a way? There are some, I've been following a group called People of Looking for the Esprit of the Forest, and they have written a book. And this book really says, this book has been conceived for you, city dwellers, to awaken you to the subtle realities of nature. And it's very much into idea, some people have sensed the spirits that are in nature and will show you where they are. And in this way, nature is more or less maybe powerful or whatever, but it's really quite a beautiful word. It's a very aesthetically nice word that people need to feel better and to go and to adventure into it. But I would like to say a little bit more. I think time is getting short, about what we call the secular enchantments of nature, because that's actually where I found most of it. And this is all these practices that do not use the word spiritual in a first moment, but will talk about, there's some esoteric heritage, but today we have filtered this through scientific knowledge. It's very strongly about scientific and artistic knowledge that bring people. 2 examples. One is activities with children, social activities that show children how to deal with trees and how enchanting trees are if you get to know them, on the left. And on the right, you see a picture I took of this. Actually, we were in a theater performance when we were walking like this in a forest, or just at the border of the forest. They called it shared landscapes. And the theater brought in the total, thousands of people, 100 after every piece, their performance to go into forest and to experience with music and whatever, how nature can be nice and beautiful, really to experience this sort of enchantment. It has been a very popular initiative here in VD and in Lausanne. Another place is in Zurich. They have created, right, thank you, a spiral garden to deconflict urban areas, like really an area that was very risky, particularly for women, and they asked women to create this garden that has also very esoteric symbols around spirals, etc. So there are many examples even into popular media, like to what extent our trees have become our friends, etc. We have to listen to the forest. And this is also institutionally strongly supported. The city of Lausanne is supporting what they call apéro around the tree each time, or climbing up trees to enchant this. And there's always this idea of nature helping us actually against these ecological risks. Okay, I think I said in the introduction basically what is this behind. This is probably around this new notion of what we call sacred, that we can actually suddenly see nature not only as harming or dangerous, but as something that gives also shelter against the same risks and the same dangers. Okay, thank you, Mar. And thank you all. Oh yes, if you want to have a look at the website, etc., it's all here.
Thank you very much, Irene. I think that has been a very beautiful presentation. You were apologizing at the beginning, and I think that you should not apologize. This was a very telling and interesting presentation. As I said at the beginning, we are going to keep the questions for the final part of the session. Now I'm going to give the word to Gabriela Irrazábal. Gabi, I think that you are here. Maybe, Irene, if you can stop the screen sharing. This will help. Yeah.
Okay. So because I want
hello,
to share
Gabriela.
Hello, everyone. Yeah. Okay.
Gabriela is a truly global scholar because she's associated at the CONICET, Argentina, but she's also associated to the RMIT in Australia, and now she's in Barcelona as a visiting scholar. So it's my pleasure to
Thank you
introduce Gabriela and give you the floor.
Let me a minute so that I can share my screen a little bit. I was thinking about, I don't know if you are seeing the presentation mode. Okay. Well, what I wanted to present today, thank you very much, Mar, for the kind presentation, and everyone here, to attend this panel, and for the invitation to the University and the Soul Symposium. What I wanted to, when I was invited to this symposium, I say, well, what can I say about risk? It's something that is a framework that we don't usually use in Argentina, at least, to analyze health, science, and beliefs. But then it made me think of some lessons learned from the last pandemic that I think it could be a good thing to share and to understand, and maybe to, explore future collaborations and analysis on these situations. So what I'm going to present are some data, raw data, about the National Survey on Science, Health and Beliefs in Argentina that I led in 2021. Now it's been a while. And we made a collaborative approach to do this research from a network of projects, people who were CIs of different projects. We collaborate in order to make a joint questionnaire. And also we got a small grant from the International Research Network for the Study of Science and Beliefs in Society, and that also helped us a lot to conduct this survey, which is a national survey in Argentina. But before I start with this, I would like to say that, well, Argentina is a middle income country, so that we have to, have some context about that. And we have universal coverage with public health. Everyone can get public health access, but the system is very fragmented and not many people can access to quality of health depending on the region where they are living. If you are in the north of the country or in the Patagonia in the south or in the major urban cities. So usually people who live in major urban cities such as Buenos Aires have better health care than people who live in the north of the country. So the system is mainly led by union-led insurance cover. I don't know if it is something common in other parts of the world, but if you are employed and you have an occupational area, such as, for example, university professors, we have our own health insurance as professors, then I don't know, workers from some factory have their own because their unions cover their needs. Then if you don't have that, you can have a private insurance. And if you don't have any of those because you're unemployed or you have disabilities, you have the public systems that is going to take care of your health. But this is important to know because during the pandemic, healthcare was suspended and it was all led to emergency situations. So these questions were of our survey was done while the healthcare system was mainly directly to the attention of COVID and not to the other conditions and diseases. So, well, to summarize, we have conducted a national survey on more than 4,000 people were respondents. We had to, as we usually do, we try to have a distribution, an equal distribution on gender, age, employment status. Also, we ask about religion because, of course, it's important for us. And we had different answers from different people who were affiliated or non-affiliated to religious beliefs. And we have a quite well distributed sampling in all areas of the country because we wanted to know everything about the north of the country, the south, the center, and the west, where Argentina is a very large country. Let me see. So what I wanted to share with you is about these common opinions about science. I mean, what people believe that science is. We are in an emergency health situation. We need the scientists. So what do you think science is? And what we found, from our respondents is that there is what Chalmers used to say, that the common visions of science, which is really based on these origins in empirism and positivism. So people think that science, or people answered that science is a knowledge based on experimentation, verification, that is truth, that search for the truth, that is true knowledge. And also that it helps in the search of answers. So all of the answers that these people gave us about what do you believe science is and how can it help in the pandemics is very well related to this knowledge, that this concept that Chalmers says, the common vision of science, or the common sense visions of science. But then when we ask about the relationship between their religion and scientific knowledge, well, we find that almost half of our respondents think that it is compatible, this empiristic, positivist consideration of science with their own religious beliefs. But it is interesting, though, that we find that 3 out of 10 of our respondents believe that human beings and other living beings exist and evolve because the world is guided by a God, by a higher being, by an energy. So we have all these beliefs and that are, together in a sense. So science is very positivistic, empiristic approach, verification, experimentation, but also we have this group of people, which is an important quantity, that believes that there is a higher power guiding the world and everything. So what do we learn about the beliefs about about coronavirus, because we ask about what do you think the corona is? So where do you think it came from? And at that time we were worried about the coronavirus, but now I think that it could be also led us to think, what about if we have another pandemic and another virus comes? So what do you think this comes from? So people answered that their main beliefs were that this came from the interaction between humans and animals, and also the destruction of the planet, and also a natural and inevitable fact. So what we start finding, or we start looking at, is yes, there were some conspiration theories or conspirational beliefs around, but also importantly, this consideration of that the interaction between nature and human beings and society. So this is something that I think it is one of the lessons that we learned from this survey now that the pandemic has passed. So I wrote a paper that I haven't published yet, but the thing is that what about this thing that we find that, yes, in the meantime, while the pandemic was going on, social media, Twitter, Facebook, even the infodemics or the fake news or fakeology that I was saying, we have many things regarding the conspirituality online, and we felt that this was like a major thing. So we wanted to actually test with people. I mean, ask them, do you believe in these conspirituality theories, or do you believe on these major beliefs? But what we find, on the other hand, is that, yes, we have found, like, I don't know. Oh, sorry. Are you seeing my presentation? I don't know. Something happened here,
yes,
but anyway.
we see it, Gabriela.
Okay, you see it. Sorry. So, so what we found is that at least we have half of our respondents. It's a lot of people, because we have like 2,500 people that say answers when we codify these answers. They say something related to the One Health approach, this concept of health as being an interrelation between humans, the environment, and animals. This is a very biomedical concept, right? Because it comes from the WHO and all the international organizations and the but it is actually there. I mean, people gave many answers, and when we concentrated them and codified them, we find that yes, there is something about that we have to pay attention to. The conspirituality theories are there, but less than the other ones. So we find that in Argentina, at least 3 out of 10 have a theory of conspiracy about this new virus that arrived, and mainly a secularization process, because we didn't find any answers related to this. This was something that God or the devil or a higher power has sent to us in our planet or something like that. So we kind of codify the questions in that way. But then when we have a virus that comes here and threats our health, and it is a risk for our own health, so what do you think the solution is going to be? Well, Argentinian population believed at that time that mass vaccination was going to be the first solution for public health and well-being. And I'm saying public health and well-being because the way in Argentina is understood public health, it is an holistic way. It is well-being or social well-being and public health. So when we consider public health, it's for our own and societal well-being. And so the vaccines appeared as something that was important as a solution for societal or public health. So, but it was a discussion in our team. Weren't people anti-vaccines there in Argentina? Weren't there mainly a anti-vaccine movement in Argentina, which is actually very active and very militant in a way. So vaccines appeared as one of the best things to help for public health. So, and even mandatory vaccination. So this is something I would like to explain, because Argentina has a tradition, a sanitary tradition on vaccination. You know, babies in Argentina receive in the first year, like 21 shots, when in their own, it's a different approach from all over the world. Even in Spain here, I was told that they don't give so many shots to babies. They don't consider that appropriate. But in Argentina, on the other hand, the first thing you receive when you are in the delivery room as a baby is a shot, actually. So they welcome to the society and they give you a vaccination. So people believe in mass vaccination as a part of public health. It is very well, it's a culture that it's over there. So, but the beliefs that are around the vaccines are not very accurate, because actually they think that vaccines are a protection, or vaccine can alter DNA, or vaccine, I don't know. Well, there are not that vaccines are a cure. So the beliefs around the vaccine, or how the vaccines work, are not very accurate, but people believe that they are a solution in a public health crisis, or a public health instrument that it is okay, that is mandatory. Even you go to jail in Argentina if you don't get your shots. So it is an important public health state regulated system. What did I say here? Because I'm not seeing very well my screen. But so what are these attitudes? Or why do you want to get the vaccines? Because even even us as researchers saying, why do people want to get so vaccinated about these vaccines that were at the time experimental, right? So everyone said yes, for public health, for epidemiological reason, we trust this vaccine. Okay, so yeah. And for social reasons, but mainly for public health and epidemiological reasons, which were the most recommended suggestions from the health authorities. But we also discovered in this research that we had an important amount of people that said that they wouldn't get vaccinated. It is a 6%, but in this quantity of people who answered our survey, more or less, there are 300 people that say that they wouldn't get vaccinated. So it's an important number. It's not a massive number, but it's an important amount of people who said that. So why wouldn't you get this vaccine? Is that we wanted to know? Yes, because I don't trust. Sorry, it is as I miss. I see that I have a mistake here on spelling mistake. It's these vaccines. I don't trust these vaccines because at that time we had like 3: the Russian vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, and the Chinese vaccine. And mainly the Argentinian government was promoting the Russian vaccine and the Chinese vaccine. So we thought that maybe there was something about the trust of the origin of these vaccines. And people said, no, yeah, I don't trust the countries that develop these vaccines. It is not necessary to get vaccinated, or I'm afraid of the side effects. You get infected even if you get the vaccine. But mainly it was an issue of trust with these vaccines. So who were these people who were anti these vaccines? I mean, the anti-vaccines that were at the moment being promoted, because Argentinian population is super vaccinated. So we had mainly men, mainly young men from the, the center of the country. I mean, the most urban center of the country, mainly Catholic and evangelical, and also, yeah, unaffiliated in a way. I think that it's important that 3 out of 10, I mean, the 30% of these anti-vaccines had someone in their families or relatives or friends that died during the pandemic. So maybe we thought that it could be as well, they get the shot and they get the virus and also they die. So maybe those things could also lead for some distrust. And most importantly, they are linked to the healthcare system in a way, or through their insurances, through their health insurances. So they are linked to the healthcare system. They are not people who are vulnerable, poor, who don't go to the doctor, who don't have education. So they are at more or less middle income people from urban cities, men with some kind of religious affiliation. Or spiritual, they didn't trust that vaccines. So to summarize, so what we have found is that people in Argentina, which is a South American country that has a different approach for the healthcare system than other Latin American countries. So because it's a universal coverage of health, and it's very different from other countries. So it's a good sample on how to. I mean, when you want to study health issues, and in Argentina is a very good country to test studies and so on. So what we found out is that there is a trust in science, but there is an opinion about science, or a belief about science, which is very in the common sense visions of science as very positivist and empirist knowledge and experimental knowledge. So that kind of science. And also that the beliefs of this new virus allowed us to detect notions that are distant from theodicies and more oriented towards holistic and planetary issues. In our study, to the detriment of conspiritualities at that time. So there is confidence in vaccines, and there is support for their mandatory administrations in case of public health emergencies. So these people anti-vaccines, anti-these new vaccines that we have, not the traditional that we get every day in our daily lives, are mainly, well, what I said before, men from metropolitan areas, yes, and young men from metropolitan areas. Also, well, and they are associated or linked, I don't know if that's the correct word, but they have bonds with doctors, and yeah, they always go to the doctor and have to the healthcare system frequently because they have access to healthcare. But thinking about these anti-vax people, or how do we frame these things? How do we understand them in a country where people trust so much in vaccines? So how do we frame that? Do we address them from the conspiritualities framework, theoretical framework, from the distrust framework, for the unbelief framework, or the public problem gas filling interactionists framework? So how can we understand? Can we start thinking from the sociology of religion, maybe in this intersection between science, health, and beliefs, in this one health approach or one social well-being approach? I don't know if because in Argentina or in our framework, theoretical frameworks, collective health or community health, we believe it actually as a one health. But can we start thinking about that together? I don't know. So, well, this is a synopsis of our insights and everything to finalize. And then that we have this open access data that you can access if you want data from Argentina and science and beliefs. What we did was a network of projects at the time, because we were working in, during the pandemic. So we did a network of projects, and we use we use our resources in a very good way to conduct research together. We developed different dimensions of this survey with all our interests, and then we share the data. We share the data set. So if you want to access to the data set, is also available. Sorry. And what I wanted to say is that I also, I also member of a health journal in Argentina, but it was a very regional journal. So you're invited also to publish one of these if you want, one of your papers and everything. And if you want to collaborate and maybe, I don't know, conduct this survey in other countries, we can also share questionnaires, data, and it would be great if we can collaborate in the future. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm here if you have any questions or suggestions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gabriela, for sharing with us the results of the survey, but also the reflections that come together with the survey, which are very interesting. Now I'm going to give the word to Bettina Schmidt from University of Wales. So thank you for being here, and I give you the floor.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak, of course, first, but also for chairing the panel, and so I hope you will need to tell me when my time is up, but I hope I will get there more or less when the time is up. I was really interested to listen to Irene and Gabriela's talk, and Gabriela, I will email you because I've done also some research during the pandemic on COVID. However, religious experience and which at the moment is circulated in Brazil. Initially it was in English in European and US countries, but we are expanding into Brazil, and so it might be quite interesting to see whether we could do something with Argentina. But I'm not talking about this. I will now try to share my screen, and Click on this one. Hopefully this works. Can you see it?
It's starting. Yes.
Yes, now we see it. Thank you, Bettina. It's there.
Good. Good, thank you. And so when I got the invitation from Anna and Christina to contribute to the symposium about well-being and spirituality and risk, I first thought, well, I've done research on, and I need to go there to get. I've done research on spirituality and well-being, and thought about linking it to this research, which I've done a couple of years ago. However, with the aspect on risk, I decided to speak about something it was part of my research when I did my research on spirit possession and trance in Brazil. I'm, however, an anthropologist, and so instead of presenting you with statistical data like Irene and Gabriela, I will start different way by setting the scene, by telling you a story from my fieldwork diary, and then afterwards I will try to unravel it a little bit more. So I hope this will work. And so the starting point. Some years ago, I attended a service at the Igreja Pentecostal Deus e Amor in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Founded in 1963, it is one of the largest neo-Pentecostal churches in Brazil. The building was impressive. It offered on the ground level several spaces for buses to drop the passengers, collect them afterwards. It looked like a well-oiled machine, and an endless number of people entered the building, where they were welcomed and directed to the next 3 rows in the main hall. The building included bookshops, cafeterias, kitchen, offices, lecture and teaching rooms, and an enormous large religious auditorium spread over several levels. Until the Solomon Temple was opened, and this is a temple by the Universal Church of Kingdom of God, and so until this was opened, this building, what you can see here on the screen, was the home of the largest church in Sao Paulo. The service at the Sunday where I went on for hours. The sermons were broadcasted through the building and outside in Portuguese and Spanish, and it created headaches for me. And so always the simultaneously translation. I noticed from the Spanish-speaking worshippers around me that most were holding a copy of the New Testament in the hand, although I have to say not everyone seemed to be able to read. The atmosphere became increasingly heated, and so not temperature, but emotional, as one preacher after the other stepped up to the pulpit. After hours of preparation, the deliverance service began. A number of afflicted people proceeded to the front, and assistants held their hands over the person's heads in order to force the evil to show itself and to leave the body. Around me, people started screaming and shouting, "In the name of Jesus," or "Say, which is out, go away," to support them, as more and more individuals went to the front after displaying erratic movements or other side of demonic affliction. When I considered leaving, and at that time I was in the building already a couple of hours, I was told by one of my neighbors in the pew to wait, as the best was still to come. Persuaded then by people to move closer to the front, I noticed that in a different entrance, several people were pushed in wheelchairs and carried on stretchers into the hall, and they were placed in the front by the church assistants, very close to that altar. For me, it was heartbreaking to see these participants trying to move when they were asked to do so, with increasingly loud screaming from the preachers and the audience. One man close to me, sitting in a wheelchair, tried desperately to push himself up. His knuckles turned white in his attempt to demonstrate his faith. But all his efforts were in vain, and disappointed, he was pushed out of the hall again. Other visible ill or even dying patients were also unable to steer and became increasingly distressed. So this excerpt from my diary and I will come and unravel it later on, gives just an ethnographic impression of a delivery ceremony in a Brazilian neo-Pentecostal church. Like previous delivery ceremonies I attended, it made an emotional impact on me, though due to the enormous scale of this particular service, this remained in the forefront of my memory, distinguished from the others. But how does this observation fit into the wider understanding of well-being as holistic? So after my research on spirit possession and trance, I continued to do research in Brazil, but more on focus on well-being and spirituality. So how do these two things now connect? Is what I will discuss in the next bit. So the predominant perception of well-being in Latin America is holistic and is usually illustrated with the phrase "buen vivir," and so translated as good living or living well. Though often the better translation, the better phrase in English would be living well together. Rodriguez, for instance, describes living well as a holistic concept rooted on principles and values such as harmony, equilibrium, complementarity, which from an indigenous perspective must guide the relationship of human beings with each other and with nature. And so what Irene also presented in her paper. Other common terms refer to living in harmony or living a full life or even coexisting well. While these terms derive from Andean cosmology, my research in Brazil confirmed a similar understanding that stresses the relations to humans as well as to other human entities, such as God, spirits of deceased, or the African deities, the Orishas, which are quite important. And so in my research, several participants used the term harmony and peace when defining well-being. Among the Brazilian replies were, for instance, people who mentioned the presence of divine or God as an important element of their concept of well-being, and described well-being as communion with God, with others, and with oneself. And so these are some excerpts from a questionnaire I did before doing some interviews. So apart from the link to physical health and the divine, several people also refer to happiness and the importance of being a member of a community and to be part of something greater than oneself. And this is quite interesting when we look, for instance, because I thought I'm not speaking only about the Neo-Pentecostals. I will also mention some of my other research areas. And so in Candomblé, for instance, which is an African-derived religion and very common, very popular in Brazil, this is also seen as an important aspect of well-being. And so this link to the Orishas. The anthropologist Marcia Goldman even argues that a person is not born ready-made at birth, but constructed during a long process of initiation, and so becoming part of the community of the Candomblé. Hence, the initial process, possession, is the moment when a person is finally created. And Goldman describes a person, therefore, as multiple and layered and composed of agencies of natural and immaterial elements. And so this is how he described it. And when I then thought about, linked it with the well-being, my gut feeling then said, well, what happened when somebody is linked to the wrong Orisha, or when somebody is not initiated? Is they then perceived as unhealthy and or disabled even? And so what happened to the other side of it? And so what about someone who is somebody then in a constant state of unhappiness or shock? And this reflects a little bit. I participated in one ceremony where somebody became second time initiate because his first initiation was seen as wrong, and therefore all his problems were linked to the wrong initiation, so he had to do a second one. And again, this is therefore made the system quite complicated and also dangerous, and there are risk at hand. But let's move on to spiritual healing, which is a very important and very popular area in Latin America. And I know that Christina is doing research on this and has published an excellent book, and Emily, who speaks after me also. And so I will just show 2 photos to show that really spiritual healing is widespread in Brazil and has various different concepts, and so not just candomblé, but here this is from a ceremony in Recife, and here is a photo of a spiritist hospital, which also offers healing in various different types. But back to the first part, and now unravel it a little bit in my last part of the presentation. So during my research, as I mentioned, on spirit possession and trance, I also looked at Christian groups, though the focus was African-derived religion and spiritism, but I also looked at charismatic Christian churches. Some of them perceive spirit possession as demonic and cause for disturbances. In order to gain a state of well-being, one needs to cleanse the body from any demonic influences and therefore exorcise the evil spirits, to embrace therefore the Holy Spirit. Wholeness here is perceived as being blessed by the Holy Spirit. This idea of well-being and health is linked to not only being blessed, but this is then to become complete in body and mind. In some churches, then, failure to be healed is consequently interpreted, as I indicated with my scene at the beginning, as lack of faith. And so what are then the wider implications of people not being healed? Are they excluded from communion, or are they perceived as under the constant influence of Satan? This all is linked to the Pentecostal theology. William Kay, one of the UK authors on Pentecostal theology, writes that the theology puts a strong emphasis on religious experience and relies on the correlation between religion, experience, and doctrine. While the baptism with the Holy Spirit and the subsequent conversion has a prominent role, the Pentecostals expect that the Holy Spirit continues to work, and one is spiritual healing. However, demonology, and so this idea of evil spirits, is a little bit at the edge of the mainstream Pentecostal theology, and despite of its popularity in all these new churches. And so Kay traces the influence back to Derek Pence, whose radio program were broadcasted worldwide in the US, from the US. And he distinguished between angels and demons. Just to check, how am I with time, Mark? Good?
Okay.
Okay.
It's 12:03 minutes, so
wonderful. Then I don't have to rush. Thank you.
Yeah, no need to rush. Yeah, 6 minutes,
yeah.
I think.
Yeah,
more or less.
Wonderful. Thank you. Derek Prince distinguished between angels and demons and different ranks between these categories. Angels would never sought embodiment with the material world, since they have a spiritual body of their own, is the idea. But demons, however, are bodiless spirits who constantly sought to live within the material world and utilize animate beings to express themselves. So what the theology means, that the demons try to take control and to get into a body, a human body, in order to become part of the material world again. And they are seen as the danger and the cause for evil. And the only solution is to expel them by exorcism. And so this is the important part here. And so Prince described demons as spirits of the pre-Adamic races who lust for embodiment, while evil angels, and therefore they are also part of angels, who are agencies which were expelled by God. And this is now the aspect a lot of Pentecostal or neo-Pentecostal churches are focusing on. And so several of the churches, like the Universal Church of Kingdom of God, but also others, characterize all deities, all spirits of any other religion than Christianity as evil. From the Greek antiques to the Orishas and the African derived traditions. All of them are seen as evil and cause of problems and disturbances in our world, and so these are seen as descendants of Satan and the cause of evil. The evil spirits usually nowadays in the literature are described as impostors instead of saying using the term Orishas, because of a law in Brazil of 1989 which prohibited religious discrimination, and so the term impostors is seen as an umbrella term now. But the important is that this reinterpretation of spiritual entities, of course, is worldwide. Birgit Meyer described it for West Africa and in others for other countries. But this is creating more and more risk and spiritual harm in some churches in Brazil. Yeah, and so this battle between demons and forces of darkness that possesses individuals, even cities, even regions are perceived as the location of these battles, has to become like a trademark of the Universal Church of Kingdom of God, but is also visible in other neo-Pentecostal churches. Pentecostal Christians see the world dominated by spirits and live in constant fear of serious harm caused by these spirits. As Anderson, for instance, also an author in Pentecostal studies in the UK, explains, exorcism is seen as a way to respond to these problems arising out of the belief in a dangerous spirit world. And the old traditions were then integrated, but as evil sides of their worldview. The conflict in understanding can even filter through on personal level. And some of the people I interviewed reported about split between family members, because some were converted to one of these new churches and some continued with old the former tradition. And so the deliverance of evil, however, does not always lead to successful healing. And this has dramatic implication for people not being healed. As earlier explained, the charisma of divine healing is regarded as part of the manifestation of the charisma, so one of the key doctrine of Pentecostal theology, and is seen as a way to that the Holy Spirit continues to work. And when it does not happen...
Now 1 minute, 2 minutes.
Good. Just this slide and one more. And so when does not happen, people are perceived as still afflicted by the demons in the need of salvation. Some might even fear to become rejected from the congregation due to the lack of faith. During the services I attended in Brazil, I noticed several people who were visibly terminally ill. They were not excluded from attending, but I saw the disappointment that they were not healed. As every successful healing is celebrated by the congregations, another victory against evil, unsuccessful stories are reminders of the ongoing battle. In this way, the neo-Pentecostal churches reflect wider biblical perception of illness and disability. Disability is conflated with sin and seen as punishment for wrongdoings, sometimes linked to family members. This attitude has also a long history in sub-Saharan Africa. People born with a disability or have to acquire one are accused of having sinned or broken a taboo, and sometimes family members are blamed. In this sense, unsuccessful deliverance within the Brazilian context increases the tension for the sufferers, while they are ultimately not blamed for the illness, but seen as victims of evil. It is their responsibility to work for salvation. And this is the last point I want to make in the paper. I started with presenting a traditional understanding of well-being. However, when I did longer interviews just before the lockdown in Brazil, I started to become a bit suspicious about the persistence of this traditional perception of living well together. during my interviews, because I notice a strong shift to a secular society that shares neoliberal ideas, similar to François' presentation yesterday. Spirituality, or even the reference to divine, is sometimes seen as, oh, it's just my personal faith, but it's not part of society. And so despite of people describing a holistic perception of well-being, I notice and more an understanding of well-being as leading a good life, which gives responsibility to the individual, including for negative experience. In this sense, faith has become also a threat to well-being, because it is because of the ongoing shift to neoliberalism. And this is where I stop my presentation. I will stop sharing, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bettina, for your presentation. A pleasure to listen. And now it's my pleasure to give the word to Emily Pierini from Sapienza University in Rome. I know we don't know each other personally, but I know that Emily have a very interesting Marie Curie project on healing and health and salvation. So looking forward to listen to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mar, and thank you to the organizers of this symposium and to the friends and colleagues who joined us today. I'm going to present precisely my Marie Curie Global Fellowship project on transnational healing, therapeutic trajectories in spiritual trance, which is a project hosted by Sapienza University of Rome, Universidade Federal de Santa Catarina in Brazil, University of Oxford, and CLIA Lisbon. And this project is part of the Heal Network for the Ethnography of Healing that I coordinate, which fosters a dialogue between scholars in the field of anthropology, psychology, religious studies, medical professionals, as well as spiritual therapists and religious groups. This research is based upon fieldwork in the spiritualist Christian order Vale do Amanhecer, that is the Valley of the Dawn, which was founded in Brazil in the 1960s by Neida Chaves Zelaya, known as the clairvoyant Tia Neiva, Aunt Neiva, and is now spreading transnationally with over 1,200 temples all over the world. And I'm looking at how the development of mediumship is used for therapeutic purposes in the temples in Brazil, Portugal, Italy, and the US. So in the Vale do Amanhecer, each temple is considered to be a pronto socorro espiritual, that is a spiritual first aid, where mediums volunteer to provide patients with a great variety of spiritual healing rituals in which they help spirits entrapped on earth after death, affecting humans, to move on to the spirit world. Patients arrive from the many walks of life in search of assistance for health, emotional or material matters, and participate in these healing rituals. However, some patients are advised about the need to develop their mediumship, and those who choose to do so in the Valley, they undergo a training, which is known as mediumistic development, in which they learn to become aware of their mediumship, control it, and they eventually become initiated. So in this paper, I propose the concept of transformative therapeutic experiences to address the therapeutic aspects of learning mediumistic trance. And I will address this concept in the light of the therapeutic trajectories of mediums of the Vale do Amanhecer. My approach flips the classical representational or pathologizing paradigms that mark the field of studies of possession and trance, especially beyond anthropology, by clinical studies. And I look at the phenomenon of mediumistic trance in relation to healing, at how it shapes therapeutic experiences, whilst being shaped by culture and a specific learning process. So in the Temple of Brazil, and many temples in Brazil, most of my interlocutors' narratives seem to show a trajectory through different religions before arriving in the valley, and so both Catholicism and other mediumistic religions, Afro-Brazilian ones, Kardecist Spiritism, and they were in search of healing or a closer and unmediated contact, an encounter with the divine, with God or spirits. Whereas in temples in Europe, rituals are performed and attended mostly by local mediums and patients rather than Brazilians migrated abroad. And their experiences are primarily marked by a movement in search of healing. In Italy, for example, these therapeutic trajectories unfolded across a network of holistic therapies or energy healing, such as Reiki, pranic healing, biotrance energetics, shiatsu, naturopathy, or shamanic retreats. And others were either connected through Catholic pilgrimages to Medjugorje or to spiritual journeys to Brazil. Therefore, my point is that the transnationalization of the Valle do Amanhecer should be analyzed not only in terms of religious pluralism, but also in relation to the therapeutic cultures that circulate in European countries and other countries. In Portugal, for example, it became clear that this idea of the Valle as complementary therapy proposed by Chianeva has taken a configuration as a therapeutic extension, or in the medium's words, where medicine does not reach, spiritual healing enters. And those patients who arrived in the temple in Portugal presenting cases of illness, anxiety, mental disorders, and then they decided to develop their mediumship there, they still continue their treatment in biomedicine. In the US, there are 4 temples, and so far I'm researching those in Framingham, near Boston and Newark, and they're both set in Brazilian neighborhoods in contexts of close cohabitation with other Brazilian religions, such as Umbanda, Kardecism, and evangelical churches. And rituals are held in Portuguese, and so they're attended by Brazilians, with some Americans attending as patients. Only 2 of them that were about to start the mediumistic development. And one interesting case was the Temple of Newark. And in this temple opened in a building that hosts also an evangelical church and a spiritist centers, which offer spiritist meetings, passes, and surgeries. And apparently the building was a former brothel, and the Temple of the Valle is set in the former gambling room. So mediums associate the presence of multiple spiritual centers to the spiritual evolution of the place through the release of disincarnated spirits inhabiting its premises. As in Italy and in Portugal, also in the US, cases of anxiety, depression, abuse, addictions may lead patients to attend rituals or even to begin the mediumistic development. So in this paper, I want to deepen the aspects of the phenomenology of mediumistic trance and its therapeutic relevance. So I'm going to delve into another dimension of a therapeutic itinerary. And this kind of movement is more sensorial, imaginal, affective, and is the outcome of the experience of learning the practice of mediumistic trance. So in analyzing the following narrative, I will explore the role of multisensory images spontaneously emerging from mediumistic trance states in a medium in development for therapeutic purposes. So I will unpack my proposal of the use of the term transformative therapeutic experiences in the light of the sensory ethnography of healing. So Mila is the pseudonym I used for a woman in the process of developing her mediumship in a Temple of the Valle in Italy. She decided to attend rituals as a patient following what she described as cosmic cry that she felt within, as a result of a health condition diagnosed as chronic cystitis, an early menopause, and an intense and debilitating fatigue with diffuse pains that did not find a medical diagnosis. So after several types of treatments through biomedicine, such as antibiotics and hormone treatments, as well as homeopathy and acupuncture, she attended rituals in the valley, and the spirit guides pointed to an imbalance in her mediumship. That is, she was producing mediumship in excess. And thus she needed to develop her mediumship. So she took the advice and learned the practice and started to incorporate spirits in a semi-conscious trance. Since the early stages of this process, she reported many mental images arising from her experiences of trance. She reckoned that these images were the predominant modality through which her spirit will communicate with and through her. While still trying to make sense of the experience of incorporating spirits at that early stage, she nevertheless felt the action of the spirits, so being moved by them. Movement is a key concept in the Valley's discourse around mediumship. Mediumship is an energy or substance originating through the blood flow. And when it's underdeveloped, it may get stuck and give rise to uncontrolled mediumistic phenomena. And then it's known as a mediumistic disorder, or it can even cause illness. So the mediumistic development helps putting mediumship into motion through the body to control it and distribute it to others. And the idea of movement also permeates the medium's descriptions of their incorporations in terms of a collaborative co-production of movement between spirit and medium. So in Miller's words, quote, "This sensation of a pillar of fire rising from the low abdomen to the head, and to feel that you're not acting on your own will, it's beautiful. In those moments, you feel a particular transportation that can be made of emotion, made of a precise sensation, but in those moments, you feel that it isn't you who is doing it voluntarily. But you're in the middle of a collaborative play between yourself and the entity that is acting. There are moments in which you feel as something is happening, a movement, heat, a force, a vision is happening, any message, let's say, that is no longer voluntary. There are precise moments in which this is strongly perceived," unquote. She felt this heat coming from the lower abdomen, which is a part that she identified as the site of her targeted organs. And then she described the images that she saw while incorporating her spirit in trance, that were a rose, water, and a road. She associated the image of a pink rose to her spirit guide, as she often sees her spirit guide in a pink dress. And in her words, quote, "Then a very crystalline forms of water arrived. I saw it flowing sideways, as if it had a very lateral perspective, a very particular thing, because I saw the channels intersecting, like just seeing water in the water. As the third next image, it became a very linear country road with a couple of curves. However, it was a very graphic image with the sand with very small pebbles, a sand that was not pure white, but a cream color. These images continued to be inside of me in a very clear form for days and days. So they continue as if to work symbolically and reappear to me all the time," unquote. Then she had interpreted the fact that 2 days later, her period reappeared after 2 years of menopause as the action of these images that moved something within her body. And this occurrence coincided with the day of Iemanjá, the Brazilian goddess of the waters. And she understood waters and flow in relation to what she called her pathology of stagnating waters, namely early menopause and chronic cystitis, a condition that she associated to the difficulty in maintaining the right balance between oneself and the others without overstepping boundaries, and so to the need to become aware of one's individuality. Water was then linked to letting everything flow without judgment or self-judgment. And another woman in Italy that I call Anna suffered of anxiety after a period of crisis in her job. During mediumistic trance, when she was learning to incorporate her guide, she saw a light feather while feeling sensation of peace and lightness. She associated it to a spirit guide and to her need of letting go of the tensions in that moment of crisis. and letting life flow with lightness. Another narrative that addresses mental health risks associated to suicidal attempts was the one from a Brazilian medium in the US who suffered of anxiety following abuses and said she was able to release the excessive tensions during the incorporation of suffering spirits. So she was dismantling layers of evidence so she could discern herself. While she was working parallelly with a therapist, keeping the treatments distinct but complementary in their purpose. Then a Brazilian medium in development in Brazil arrived in the valley with the consequences of tuberculosis and anxiety, also following abuses, which caused her breathing problems. She said that through learning to entregarse, that is to yield herself as an instrument for spirits to heal the others, she felt peace, release, and eventually found healing. So to wrap up this analysis, referring to her training in learning mediumistic trance, Mila said, quote, we can experience mediumistic development classes as words that flow or as formative experiences, unquote. I therefore use the term trance-formative therapeutic experiences to address the therapeutic aspects of learning trance, tackling this processual character of these experiences, treating them not as a one-off event, like a trance event, but tackling the processual, the broader perspective of this practice in development, which implies a long-term commitment and responsibility. It means growing into something a long time, reshaping bodies and selves, the effect of which expands between the single occurrence of a mediumistic trance state in the ritual. I'm pointing to a process which is incremental in the sense that Schmidt intended as a reorientation of somatic attention, and therefore differs, as noted by Strathern and Stewart, from what might be called miraculous healing. We see how for the patients, seems to be still invisible to biomedicine, such as Mila's chronic disease, is made visible by spirits. Firstly, providing a spiritual etiology for that illness. And in that case, it might be due to the action of a spirit or the undeveloped mediumship. And then by means of the mental images in trance, like the waters. These images, although sudden in their manifestation to the medium's awareness, they're said to continue to work within the body as embodied images, which brings me again to Schmidt's imaginal performances in charismatic ritual healing, and how these sequences of revelatory images or diagnostic images may enhance the patient's disposition to be healed. According to Schmidt's, imaginal performance is a bodily practice insofar as it engages multiple sensory modalities that constitute healing as real. Alternative and complementary therapies have been approached by Ruth Barkan as sensual practices that might focus on particular senses, for example, touch and massage and smell in aromatherapy, or as intersensory or synesthetic experiences. Hence, spiritual healing is a form of, quote, embodied knowing irreducible to vision, or even vision supplemented or accompanied by other senses, unquote. It is an intersensoriality despite our awareness of it. To conclude, mediums in the Valley learn mediumistic ways of knowing, while learning is multisensorial. Synesthetic sensory experiences and underpin the medium's narratives of trance, such in Mila's case, when she described this interplay between thermoception, so the feeling of heat in her body, and extended visions, so these images of colors, and embodied images of water acting moving substances perceived as being stagnant in the body. So developing mediumship is a way to put substances into motion, to regulate their production and balance. A near balance should be intended in the terms advocated by Elizabeth Su when she examines notions of the body in balance in practices of humoral medicine, namely not as equilibrium, but in the sense of, quote, ever-changing fluid interdependencies, in the sense of moderation, as opposed to an oscillation between extremes, unquote. Hence, moving substances, moving bodily fluids, having one's body moved by spirits and multisensory images is attuning oneself to a new rhythm of life as a reaction to the stagnation caused by or even causing illness, opening up possibilities of change, of transformation, in this case by means of trance for a particular formative process or transformation. So spirit mediumship and possession are then something more than marginal practices depicted as by the literature as belonging to some distant otherness. They're rather increasingly transnational, and so they should be considered along with contemporary therapeutic practices as operating besides biomedicine in relation to both spiritual and therapeutic networks. And this idea being published as part of my monograph on the Vale and as part of this latest edited book, and Bettina's also wrote a chapter contributing to Other Worlds, Other Body, which was released and published this year. And perhaps some of you might be interested in the final conference of this project, Sapienza in Trance, Healing, Cooperation and Imagination, which will take place, will be held in Rome at Sapienza University on 12-14 September. And we will have several workshops, a visual ethnography workshop, workshop with practitioners of healing, research paper, a keynote by Thomas Shordes. So you're welcome to participate either online or presentially. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Thank you very much to listen to you and to be part of this panel. So now we have a question